Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the newest edition of AmiSights. I'm Ami Kassar, your host, along with our co-host, Lynn Ozer, aka SBA Queen. Today, we're so excited to have my friend, Dr. Malik Muhammad, on with us. Malik is an incredibly inspiring entrepreneur with a fascinating story who has wisdom to share with all of us and is a prominent speaker and leader in different EO circles. Malik, you're a busy man, so thank you for taking time to chat with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so very much for the invitation. It's an honor.
Awesome.
So today, why don't you take us back to the beginning? I love to know when the entrepreneurial spirit entered your body. And when did you figure out this was going to be your path to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. That's a good question. I think the origin story of sort of my entrepreneurial journey was rooted not necessarily in sort of like having a business idea and kind of thinking, hey, I can do it better than maybe my boss or something like that. I think it really strikes back to some of the things that I was experiencing as a young person and this deep and abiding desire for freedom. And so my entrepreneurial journey really is rooted in freedom and wanting to be able to have more say, more command of my own destiny. And so entrepreneurship gives me that ability to do that and serve the world in a way that that I think is wrapped into my purpose and mission. So I grew up in a pretty unstable conditions. The intersection of poverty and racism and dysfunction in my own family, and so wanting, like a lot of folks who grew up in sort of unstable conditions, wanting to find stability. And after working in public education for a long time, I cut my teeth in education in Philadelphia, Southwest Philadelphia, teaching in the inner city. I always tell the story that when I first started teaching in Southwest Philadelphia, they said, if you teach or attend a school that starts with an S or a T, it's a problem. And my first school was at Tilden and my second school was at Shaw. So I was right in the heart of the matter, but learned a lot about serving young people, the underserved, the marginalized, and myself along the way. And then started teaching in Baltimore, and then rose to the ranks of public education to run schools. But all along, I really was looking for, how can I have command and a bit of control of the destiny of who I was going to be, how I was going to be in the world, and ultimately my family. And so that took me to entrepreneurship. And so after what I might consider a long apprenticeship in corporate America, right? I decided to strike out on my own, started a side hustle in 2012, which would emerge to become a professional development and training company called Akoben. And then I left a full-time position as a vice president of a corporation in 2018 to start another company called Transforming Lives, which is alternative education. So, yeah.
Tell us about those side hustle days. What was that like? What were you up to? How'd your family talk?
Yeah. So I was we were at the time we were running alternative schools. So I left a position as a career college president right outside of Philadelphia to go and serve young people again as a principal of a failing alternative school. This was circa maybe 2007 or so. And so we're running an alternative school and having really good results, and in turning the lives around and transforming the lives of some young people that had been misunderstood, misrecognized, and kind of abandoned by society in some ways. And so folks were asking me to come and teach and talk and things like that. So I needed an organizational vehicle. So literally, I started the company because I needed an organizational vehicle to kind of just process payments and all of that stuff and set it up. So I started that company in 2012. I've kind of always had a side hustle. I've always had multiple streams of revenue to kind of make sure that I wasn't dependent on anything. And this just gave the opportunity to do that. But eventually, as a lot of side hustles do when they grow, you either have to step away and step into them fully, or bring on support that you may not trust or whatever. And so all of that. And so I was doing a bunch of that. And eventually I needed to step away in order to kind of live that more fully. So.
When
Yeah.
you say that, you weren't in a position to be able to do it full time and hire help, or you just didn't see a future for that particular business?
No, that business is still operating and thriving, right? So that side hustle was really growing and developing. But part of it was also fear. It was like, hey, how do I merge this side business into a fully developed full business, right? With passing thresholds, right? Beyond, when you hit that 500,000 mark, right? And that $1 million mark in terms of revenue, and what are the structures, systems, all of that stuff that need to go along with that. And so there was some trepidation, I think, on my part, right? And then also I was thinking, to be quite honest with you, that I didn't necessarily know enough around my business acumen, right? So I had been brought up and classically trained as an educator, and and master's and doctorate in that, in educational leadership, but not necessarily knowing the business side. So I stayed in, right, my full-time gig in as an executive to kind of learn those lessons on someone else's dime, to be quite honest with you,
Well,
for
that's
a little
great.
while. Yeah, and then step more fully into not just one business but two at the time.
So you learned your business acumen, as you refer to it, while you were working in corporate America, and
Yeah,
not formally trained like you were in education. It's interesting because so many go into business with like a background strong like yours, but without that business acumen,
yeah,
and they don't probably know enough to step away, or don't know where to get the resources. So it's kind of an interesting route you took to learn it on someone else's dime. I can
yeah.
find that fascinating.
Well, I remember I was the first time that I really had P&L responsibilities. I was sitting in Philadelphia in a family home that belongs to my wife's family, and I was there by myself. I had a budget. It was, I had hard copies of the budget laid out on the bed, and I was like, oh my gosh, they even trusted me with about $4.7 million, and I don't. What is this term EBITDA? What the
Oh
heck
boy.
is that, right? Like, this is just. And so I went on a learning. I like to learn, right? So I'm a relatively good student, and so I just went about the business of learning that, and being held to sort of fiscal accountability, and then learning the ins and outs of P&L, fiscal management, all of that kind of stuff.
Let me tell you a secret, my friend. There's a lot of people running companies that size now who still don't know what EBITDA is.
Yeah, right, right.
Malik, let's talk a little bit about risk. So, do you consider yourself a risk averse or a risk tolerant or a risk flexible person?
Yeah, definitely risk flexible. I don't think that I crave to be on the edge of the needle, but I do find that my greatest growth lives right there, right? I think I am, if I have fear, but part of that fear is also in playing small. So frequently I want to put my shoulders back, put my head up, look it right in the face, and let's go. I also recognize that part of my own sort of problem, trauma echoes from my experience, is that I've got a chip on my shoulder. So if the world or other people or the person in the mirror tells me that I can't do something, that is exactly the thing that I try to overcome. So that's where sort of the risk flexible kind of comes in. I enjoy it. Yeah.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and we're actually working on some stuff and maybe some research about this, and maybe you can give us your thoughts. So entrepreneurs inherently are risk takers, right?
That's right.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, I mean, we hear all the stories. Do you think there's a difference in entrepreneurs who who come from nothing and have nothing to fall back on if it all falls apart, versus entrepreneurs who are willing to take risks, but they know that if, God forbid, there's like it all falls apart, they can reach back out to family and ask for help.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. That might, that circle might bend around on itself, right? That there might be a few degrees removed of those who come from nothing, and therefore I know what the bottom feels like, right? Like for me, I think of, I've said to my wife and in our small family, at times that, listen, if we lose it all, I know what that feels like, right? And while I don't want it, I know we'll be able to get it faster, better, and smarter than we were ever able to get it before, right? So we're able to build back up in a way. I know what it feels like to have the electricity turned off and be evicted, right? So if that should ever happen again, which, God forbid it won't, it's not the worst thing. It didn't break me, and it won't break us. Therefore, we'll be able to move faster. And I think that there's probably a couple degrees removed from someone who comes from a very different kind of scenario where it's like, hey, I've gotten here, and there is an opportunity. If I fall back, there's family, there's folks that I can kind of rely on, right? That therefore we can both kind of take some risks, right? Because either I know what the floor feels like, the ground is solid underneath of me, right? Because of family, or it's because I felt the nadir, the bottom. Where the risk averse I found is those folks that are sort of in the middle, where, I don't necessarily have family to fall back on, and I've never fallen as far as below zero, right? So therefore I need to hold on to everything that I possibly get. And so therefore I find that those are the folks that tend to be most risk averse in my experience.
I think
it's super interesting. I mean, sometimes one of the things I've been thinking about is, so when I started, I had my house, my mortgage, I lost my big fat corporate job, and my kids were roughly 9 and 7. Okay. And I mean, I risked it all and then some.
Yeah.
But would I have done that not knowing in the back of my head if I had family to fall back on? I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't think I took advantage of it or I abused it in any way, but it's just interesting to think about sort of, the different perspectives. Like, I'm trying to coach an entrepreneur right now who's on the risk of losing it all. And I've helped him as much as I can, but I can't help him anymore. And he has no family to fall back on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I wonder about that feeling for him versus, say, that feeling for me when, because those first few years are all brutal. Maybe you de-risked it a little bit by doing it as a side hustle.
Yeah, there was definitely some de-risking, right? It's interesting because while that was happening, so my wife and I, we'll celebrate 30 years marriage this year. So we got married when we were in undergrad. We were 20 years old. Our daughter was on the way, so she in my wife's stomach told us to get married, and we listened. And so we were 19 when we got together, 20 when we got married. No one thought it was a good idea except for us. And as we were attending this private liberal arts, really expensive school out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called Franklin and Marshall College. And but what was interesting is that, in the early years, it was all risk, right? So I'm working full time, and my wife is, pursuing her doctorate in clinical psychology, right? So relatively one income and some student loans. So there was risk there. While she's doing that, I'm getting my master's. So it was all of that. So we weren't completely de-risking it. It was shifting sort of risk here, risk there as we kind of played out. But yeah, I think there was definitely some, let me let me not push all the chips in, right, while I'm learning. But then there was my wife's voice also saying, when I was a classroom teacher, she said, listen, I think you're doing good work. And I think you probably have more in you than the contribution that you're making right now, which was hard to hear. I mean, that's some truth telling that was hard for me to hear at the time, because I'm like, being a teacher is honorable and, and yada, yada, which it is, of course, right? But what she was saying is that I think you might have more to give to the world in a different way than what you're doing right now. And I listened to her, and it was hard to hear, but I listened. And so stepping out on faith in that way wasn't just my faith, it was her faith and our children's faith in me. So yeah.
But risk goes all along the on. That's one of the things I try to teach when I talk, is that we're taking, yes, the risk is probably feels higher when we're starting, but the risk doesn't never end.
That's right.
Right. But the risk never ends. There's risk in everything. If you have your big fat corporate job, there's risk in that too, right? So
yeah. And also, when I sort of look in the rearview mirror, the most dependable risks that I've ever taken have been when I bet on myself, right? The most dependable boss that I've ever had has been myself, right? So what I have not ever wanted, and this is part of that entrepreneurial journey, is that I didn't want my livelihood and to be my primary responsibility to take care of myself and my family dependent upon the will and whim of someone else. Right. So I've never been fired from a job. It's not true. I was fired from a job when I was a teenager, right? But I haven't been fired from a job as an adult. So I think I do good work, but it was still dependent on the will and whim of factors that, I couldn't ultimately make under my control. And I think maybe that was part of that craving for stability. And I can create the stability a little bit better.
Yes. Malik, tell us, what do you do now?
Yeah.
What do you spend your time with? What's the work that you do?
Yeah, so it's between sort of leading both organizations, between those, but I've got really good leadership teams. So the one company, Akoben, it's professional development, training, coaching. So we that company, we primarily, about 90% of our book of business is with schools and school districts. So training, coaching, consulting school districts, primarily around how to improve their functioning of their communities, their school communities, serving young people, serving each other's staff. So around restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, cultural relevancy, equity work. And then the other 10% of that book of business is what I do with EO and speaking and entrepreneurial leadership. So it's that. So that's Akoben. And then Transforming Lives is the other company, and that is alternative education. So we currently have 4 brick and mortar schools here in Delaware. And then we also have another maybe 15, 16 programs throughout Delaware and into Maryland, and hopefully soon into Pennsylvania. So that's working with young people that are typically removed from their traditional classrooms and school environments because they need additional support, behaviorally, emotionally, et cetera. So I spend my time kind of supporting our leadership teams between those 2 organizations.
Is finding help, employees with the skill set to deliver your vision one of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we have issues with hiring, just like everyone else. For us, the skill set, will set balance dynamic is so important, right? So not everyone is built to work with young people who don't understand, right? How to show up in the world in a way that could be help them be understood. So we often look for value alignment, right? Will set, all of that. We can largely teach the skills, right? We can work with people to get them certified, et cetera. But finding adults who want to serve young people or do this work is ultimately who we go hunting for. And then some of those positions are tremendously difficult right now. I mean, we're having uh, we compete against school districts for teachers, which is a very difficult thing to compete against, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, so teachers are prime um, uh, prime talent that we go after, but they're only about 30% of our staff. The other 70% or so are clinicians and behavioral support folks,
Right.
which is interesting as well.
So tell us more about those schools, the age of the students, size of them, how you come
Yeah.
up with them, how you pick a location, how the business model works, all that.
Yeah, so we have a model of alternative education that is uniquely designed to be different than the traditional school down the street, right? So we're not just a smaller environment, of the same kind of education that students would receive down the street. So we serve students from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. So roughly ages 5 to 21. So a huge gap there. Most of our schools are secondary, so middle school, high school, right? The average student is going to come with a variety of academic needs, but pretty significant and prominent social emotional needs. So whether it might be some students on the autism spectrum or labeled and diagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder, et cetera, et cetera. But most of them have a tenure and a history of pretty negative interactions with adults. Our class sizes are no more than 15. So they're at least half the size of traditional school, with probably most of them ranging around 10 students. And then we have a staff to student ratio in our alternative schools of somewhere around 5 to 1. So there might be 2 adults in that class of 10 or 3 adults in that class of 15, oftentimes. And then our more intense programs, there's a ratio of about 1 to 3. So much smaller environments, really supporting young people in that way. The business model is interesting in that almost all of our programs have capitated contracts. So we win them mainly through an RFP process, and those RFP contracts run from 1 to 3 years. So the business cycle is really nice because once we earn the contract, it's often just about expense management, which is really nice. We have relatively consistent revenue streams, which a lot of my peers and colleagues who are entrepreneurs wish they had, right, in terms of consistent revenue streams. But we're really, just managing expenses, and the vast majority of that is staffing. So.
This is a for-profit model, correct?
Yes, yeah. So we both companies are for profit. Yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
And how many students in the alternative schools total?
Yeah, so average, I mean, each school is different, but our largest program right now, I think, has about 115 students, which is about half the size of one of the largest schools that we've run before, in another company. And so about 115 on the larger side, all the way down to about 55 students. Now, I like to think of it as having rolling admission, right? So like in a college setting, right? So the students that we have in September are not necessarily going to be the same students we have in January or February. So we're going to receive students all throughout the year. So
Is there any private pay, or is it all government backed?
Yeah.
No, so great question. Yeah, it's all government backed. So
Yeah.
we haven't opened what would be akin to a charter model, right, or private school where parents are able to pay via tuition or vouchers. We've been asked to. In fact, parents have students are assigned to us from the public school, and initially, because of the sort of moniker of alternative, like, oh, it's a bad school for bad kids, and even though my child, punched a teacher or spit on someone, a police officer, as they're getting handcuffed coming out of the school, I don't want them to go to that bad school. But almost always, parents want their child to remain once they're with us, because for the first time, their child is being understood. They're getting phone calls home, letting them know how well their child has done. We have a bunch of approaches and models that kind of see their children differently. And so some have offered to pay tuition in order for their child to stay. But that's not the model that we've set up at this point.
Do they get recommended by a mainstream school, or do the parents seek you out?
Yeah, so it's a bit of both and, but it's more the former, right? So yeah, so something usually happens, or a series of things happen in their traditional school, mainstream school, and then they come up for consideration to be sent to an alternatively placed school. So in almost every school district across the nation, there is a version of an alternative placement. And some of them are run by the district themselves, and then others have a vendor like us come in and support the schools.
Your mission is incredibly important. Do you have an entrepreneurial part of you that wants to expand the business for, business reasons, to make it a more widely available service?
Yeah. So we just reimagined our mission. Part of it was the streamline. When we think about our mission, part of what we recognize that our audience is also those that we serve. So we want to make it in language that folks can really grasp, hold on to, speak to their hearts. So our mission for transforming lives is that we will prove that all youth can succeed, right? So just very simple that. And so what I've sort of felt in terms of, growth mindset from an entrepreneurial perspective is that if we believe we're doing good work, and we believe that we are, right? Data kind of shows it, but we really believe we're doing good work. And we know, there's a big and we know that there are some others that are not doing great work, serving this population or whatever it is that you're doing. Then what we have communicated, what I've been communicating is we therefore have a moral obligation to grow. We have a moral obligation to eat their lunch. Because if we're doing good work in serving young people or whatever the audience is, and others are not, we have a moral obligation to grow. Conversely, if we are not doing good work, we have a moral obligation to either change it or shrink so that we're not negatively impacting the world. And so for me, that's what we communicate. Yeah, so expansion, growth is really big. We have added one school or program every single year since our inception in 2018. We've grown year over year with a compound annual growth rate of somewhere around 35%. And so we're seeing really good success. People seem to think that we're doing okay.
Yeah. That's great.
I love it. So
yeah.
do you have
those numbers I can recite because of that apprenticeship that I did in business before coming into this one. So
how do you figure out, you have so many fascinating things going on, Malik? You've got your EO work going on, you've got your schools, you've got your training. How do you figure out how to divide your time?
Time management skills.
Yeah.
What are they?
Yeah. You know what? Part of it is I have intentionally brought together the leadership teams from both of my companies on a very regular basis. So we share space together. So both leadership teams are operating out of what we call the Village, which is our offices based in Wilmington, Delaware, which allows me to flow between those leadership teams pretty seamlessly. So as I'm working with one strategy, we're meeting together sometimes for strategy meetings. So I'm able to master time and space sometimes because I'm not dividing myself. We also have very similar missions and visions. The business models are a bit different, but that allows me to kind of be in place as a leader and spend a bit of time between those. I also at times overdo it when it comes to doing some of the direct work, right? Like going and speaking for EO. I sometimes go too heavy with my own sort of service delivery and stuff like that. And so the team or my wife or the dog say, hey, listen, you need to slow the heck down and sit your butt down a little bit. And so I tend to do that. And then I've been trying to set up some good routines to kind of give energy to myself. So I've got a meditative practice that I do. I've been running pretty hard on some workout routines, which is good. And I've discovered that I really enjoy woodworking. So my happy place sometimes is just playing around with some wood and laser engraving and stuff like that. So
That's
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
If you have a vision of where your life is 5, 10 years from now, what do you see? More of the same?
That's a good question. I think for me, transitioning into a role in a place where I can contribute more ideologically, and sharing and writing more. It took me, 47 years to write my first book, and now I'm on now I just finished my third, so it's going to be released next
Wow.
month. So now I need to just sit down and spend a bit more time writing and sharing ideas in that way. I need to resist the urge over the next 5 years, resist the urge to start another business. I, I need to resist that urge, because it's the as you de-risk, right? Going back to that, as we de-risk some things because, business is sort of moving along pretty well. I'm looking for the next challenge, right? And getting bored at times. So looking for the next challenge. And so I want to resist the urge to do some of that and sit in a place of like, okay, how do we make some things better? And then also, how do I make myself better? So yeah, on a personal level, I want to get healthier. I'm not as healthy as I need to be. And so over the next couple of years, that's going to be the priority as well. Yeah.
Because the business has been your priority, is that what you're saying? So you ignored your own health, like many
Yeah,
entrepreneurs tend to do.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it was that, right? So the building of that, the building of the family, trying to make good and change in the world, right? But it's all this externalizing stuff, which meant that I was stuffing emotions, right? I've got some unreconciled emotional pain from my childhood and all of that stuff that I need to kind of, deal with in a good way. So yeah, attention on other things, building the businesses, building family, trying to support change in the world. Yeah. And so slowing down a little bit in that way is going to be
Awesome.
Has
Malik,
being
go ahead.
has being in EO taught you how to do that? How to
um
take care of yourself as you are growing your business?
yeah. In two ways. One, it's plugged me into some folks that I think do it really well, right? So in my forum, for instance, there's some guys and women who are really attending to their health and well-being. We talk about that a lot, right? Really trying to understand how we can pour into ourselves and each other. And then also EO has shown me how not to do it, how it goes wrong, right? Like, I think that sometimes as entrepreneurs, we can be chasing the next thing and we get our fix, right? So whether that fix is traveling here and there and everywhere around the world to kind of get a learning experience, but not learning, right? And just to kind of, toast champagne with folks in a really cool once in a lifetime experience, right? And then Warren Rustan, who's a mentor and friend of mine, he talks a lot about not being a public success, but a private failure. And so I've really been trying to take that to heart. And so EO kind of has shown me kind of how to do that well. And then also some examples of how not to do it.
What do you mean? What does he mean by that?
Yeah, just that we can get accolades and praise for the things that we have built in the world, but not be able to look at all in the mirror around how we've shown up in our marriages, how we've shown up as parents, how we've shown up as as someone's child, what we've contributed to our own well-being. Yeah, I mean, to share vulnerably, Warren and I spoke around midnight one time in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I was lamenting to him about, like, my health and just where I was, and he said, Malik, listen, you speak in front of people all the time, and people can see that you are not healthy. They can see it, literally, and in order for your walk, for your talk to be your walk, you've really got to close the gap between what it is that you're asking people to do in terms of leadership and how you're leading your own health. And that was hard, to hear and hard to swallow, but it was right. It was the kind of information that I needed and the kind of nudge and kick in the butt. So,
Malik, I heard a speaker at Minnesota a few months ago, a guy called Danny Marteau, Martoe. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he's one of these sort of wellness guys. And I started on his 10-week program, like one-on-one coaching, about almost 5 weeks ago now. And it's, I check in on it's like changing everything, right? So I have to check in with all my meals.
Yeah.
I've cut out all sugar, all processed foods, all alcohol, although I've never been a big drinker, all caffeine, all dairy.
Wow.
And I'm, for the first time in my life, exercising 5 times a week.
Nice.
And he sent me for a test. I don't know if you've heard of these tests called DEXA scans or DEXA-Fit tests.
No.
And I went to have it down in Philly. It's like a body scan. And I'm sort of a data-driven guy. So it told me I'm 55. It told me my biological age was like a 59-year-old.
Yeah.
And it told me that I gave me an overall body score of a C-. And the scariest thing for me was that I didn't even know this existed, but we all have visceral fat in our bodies, which is fat attached to organs.
Yeah.
That's the bad stuff. You're supposed to have less than a pound. I had 8.4 pounds of it.
Oof.
And it literally, at least for me, that data just like knocked the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I'm down, like, I can't believe it. I'm down like 17 pounds in like 5 weeks.
Nice.
I'm exercising 5 times a week. My mental clarity is way better. And the first week was brutal. I almost fired half my team.
Yeah.
But I'm just sharing that now I'm only 5 weeks in, so I don't want to jinx anything. But I think many of us, and I think we don't prioritize self-care. We worry more about taking care of others and ourselves. And this guy's just kicking my ass to spend time worrying about myself.
Yeah.
And it's I actually think he has this 10-week program, which I wish my forum would do, but together, because like he runs accountability groups and stuff. But it has I know this is not about me, but you brought up this health and wellness stuff, and it's like almost like a boot camp.
Yep.
And like nothing fits me anymore. I can't believe it. So,
yeah, that's
nice
awesome,
t-shirt though.
Yeah, my t-shirt's still.
Yeah, Ami, congratulations, man, on that.
Not
Both,
great.
Both the outcomes, right? But then also just the process, right? Like what speaks to you, and the data really does. And similarly, I have a discipline coach. I'm part of a discipline mastermind group, and it's about 5 or 6 guys, and we meet every week. I also have an EO colleague who's like a friend and a brother, and every morning we actually text each other our daily weigh-in. So there's accountability. What I've needed is a warm blanket of accountability, not even a heavy blanket of accountability wrapped around me, right? And I've needed people to speak to me in a way that really probably is more resembles my high school football coach, right?
Yeah.
Like you know, Coach Bear was his name because he looked like a bear. And I've got these guys around me that, you know, broke no excuses. And you know, my discipline coach is more like Yoda. He's like, listen, do or do not. There is no try, right? Malik, did you track today or did you not track today? Did you work out today? Did you not work out today? Like, you know, and if the answer is no, then okay, look me in the eye and tell me that, right? But
Right.
make no excuses. And I've needed that. And so so yeah, since January 1, really December 30th this year, I'm down 32 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, so on,
You
you know,
guys are awesome.
a way to go. But I'm feeling good about the outcome. But more importantly, is that I'm appreciating the journey. So yeah, yeah. This morning, woke up and the parts of myself, right, my spirit, my mind, and my body were in conflict together around whether or not I should go work out. And eventually my spirit worked out and won and said, listen, at least go walk the dog. So we went on a 2 mile, 2.5 mile walk. So that was cool. So
Good for
yeah.
you.
Great.
Malik, if our listeners want to learn more about you or find you, is there a place to go?
Yeah, so both of our websites, www.akobenllc.org, and then also tliservices.org, our websites. And we are also on Instagram and those things. I'm not very active personally on social media, but I'm also on LinkedIn. I think Dr. Malik Muhammad on that as well. But yeah,
Malik,
yeah,
could you tell the audience the name of the books you've written?
yeah, absolutely. So my first book is called The Restorative Journey: The Theory and Application of Restorative Practices. I also wrote a chapter in a book called Colorizing Restorative Justice. And this latest book, which will be released on in May on Malcolm X's birthday, is called We Can Save Our Boys of Color, which is really my dissertation converted into a book. So
That's so
those are
exciting.
yeah.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
I look forward to seeing it,
Thank you.
reading it. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. And we will look forward to seeing you soon, Malik.
Absolutely.
Safe travels on your trip to Malaysia coming up soon. We'll miss you on this.
Thank you.
On the other side.
Yeah.
And let's get together soon, buddy.
Absolutely. Ami and Lynn, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.